Hey there. Tonight we're doing something a little different, a little senatorial. We're stepping into the life of a Roman senator during the early imperial period. Let's say around the reign of Tiberius, if you're keeping track, which you probably aren't, because you're trying to fall asleep. This is not a story about power in the way you imagine power. This is not about commanding legions or shaping the fate of empires. This is about waking up before dawn with your stomach in knots because you said the wrong thing at dinner 3 nights ago, and you're not sure who heard it. This is about sitting through 6 hours of Senate debate about grain subsidies while performing interest you don't feel. This is about the exhausting performance of being important, when importance is mostly just anxiety with better furniture. If you're enjoying these excursions into historical discomfort, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more of this. More historically accurate tedium, narrated with the enthusiasm it deserves. And if you have thoughts about Roman senators or the particular flavor of stress that comes with political ambition, drop a comment. I read them. Now, dim the lights. Get comfortable. Maybe grab some water if you need it. Let's begin. You wake in darkness. Not the comfortable darkness of deep night when sleep still feels possible. The anxious darkness of very early morning when your mind has already started working and your body knows rest is over, even though the sun hasn't risen. You lie there, eyes open, staring at nothing. Your bedroom is large, expensive. The kind of space that announces wealth without needing to say anything. Painted walls, good furniture. A bed that cost more than most Romans earn in a year. Linen that's been washed and folded by slaves whose names you don't remember. None of it helps. Your mind is already moving, already calculating, already running through the day ahead and the dozen ways it could go wrong. There's a meeting this morning. Informal. Just a few senators gathering before the official session to discuss what you're supposed to discuss during the official session, which sounds redundant until you understand that the real Senate happens in these pre-meetings. The actual chamber is just theatre. Performance for the record. You need to be there, need to say the right things, need to read the room correctly and align yourself with the right faction without appearing too eager or too reluctant. It's exhausting before it even starts. You think about the younger senator who's been making noise lately, the one with family money and military credentials, and that particular kind of confidence that comes from never having failed at anything important. He reminds you of someone. Takes you a moment to realize it's yourself. 20 years ago, before you learned that confidence was just ignorance wearing expensive clothes. He's dangerous, not because he's competent, though he is, but because he doesn't know he's dangerous yet, doesn't understand that every word in the Senate is a potential weapon. Every alliance is temporary. Every friend is a future enemy who just hasn't realized it yet. You'll need to watch him, maybe cultivate him, maybe undermine him. You haven't decided yet. The anxiety sits in your chest like a stone, heavy, constant. You've learned to function with it, learned to speak and smile and perform authority while your insides are churning. But it never goes away. Not really. It just becomes part of the background, like tinnitus, like the sound of your own breathing. You think about going back to sleep. You won't. You never do. Once your mind starts working, it doesn't stop. It just cycles through the same calculations over and over until you get up and do something about them. The room is still dark. You can hear the household beginning to stir. Slaves moving through distant corridors. The soft sounds of a large home preparing for the day. Your spouse is still asleep in the adjacent room. You sleep separately. Most wealthy Romans do. It's practical, allows for different schedules, different needs, also makes it easier to pretend you're not lonely. You push that thought away. Useless, self-indulgent. You have work to do, obligations to meet, a position to maintain. You sit up. The stone floor is cold under your feet. Good. The cold helps, sharpens your mind, reminds you that comfort is temporary and vigilance is constant. A slave appears in the doorway. He's been waiting, listening for the sounds of you waking. That's his job, to anticipate your needs before you express them, to be invisible until required. You nod. He understands. The morning routine begins. But before you move, before you stand and begin the process of becoming the person everyone expects you to be, your mind drifts backward to a different morning, a different life. You were 23, maybe 24, young enough that the future still felt like something you could shape rather than something that shaped you. You were a military tribune, junior officer, attached to a legion stationed in Germania. The posting was supposed to be educational, a chance to learn command, to see how the empire actually functioned at its edges where theory met reality and usually lost. You remember waking in a military tent. The cold was worse there. Real cold. The kind that made your breath visible and your fingers ache. But it was simple cold. Straightforward. You could deal with it by adding layers or moving closer to the fire. Not like the cold you feel now. The kind that comes from inside. From knowing too much. From understanding exactly how precarious everything is. The Legion had routines, drills, patrols, clear hierarchies. You knew who gave orders and who followed them. You knew what success looked like. You knew when you'd done well and when you'd screwed up. There was a clarity to it, a purpose. You weren't important. You were just another junior officer learning the trade. But that lack of importance felt like freedom. You could make mistakes, learn from them, grow. Nobody was watching your every word for signs of disloyalty. Nobody was calculating whether your success threatened their position. Nobody was wondering if you were too ambitious or not ambitious enough. You were just a soldier, doing soldier things, in a place where the rules made sense. You remember one morning in particular. Winter, snow on the ground. The Legion was preparing for a patrol along the frontier. Nothing dramatic, just routine surveillance. Making sure the Germanic tribes across the river weren't planning anything interesting. You were checking equipment, making sure your men had what they needed. Proper boots, decent cloaks, enough food for 3 days. One of the soldiers, a veteran maybe 30 years old, which seemed ancient to you then, made a joke about the cold. Something about how his balls had retreated so far north they were practically in Britannia. You laughed. Actually laughed. Not the performed laughter of political dinners. Real laughter. The kind that comes from shared misery and the absurdity of standing in snow while pretending to be ready for combat. The veteran looked at you, nodded. A moment of connection. Soldier to soldier. Nothing more complicated than that. You can't remember the last time you laughed like that. The patrol went fine. No combat. No drama. Just cold and boredom, and the satisfaction of completing a task that had clear parameters and measurable outcomes. You came back to camp, ate, slept, woke up and did it again. It was hard, physically demanding, sometimes dangerous. But it was honest. You knew what you were doing and why you were doing it. You knew who your enemies were. You knew what victory looked like. Not like now. Now your enemies smile at you during dinner. Now victory looks like survival. Now the rules change depending on who's watching and what they think they heard. You left the military after 3 years, came back to Rome, started the climb. Everyone said it was the right move, the smart move. Military service was fine for building character and making connections, but real power was in Rome, in the Senate, in the networks of obligation and favor that actually ran the empire. They were right. Technically, you did gain power. You did climb. You did become someone whose opinion mattered. But standing in that tent in Germania, checking boots and making sure your men had enough food, you were happier than you've been in 15 years. You didn't know it then, didn't recognize it. You thought you were bored. Thought you were wasting your potential. Thought real life was waiting for you back in Rome. Turns out, real life was the thing you left behind. The slave is still waiting. Patient. Silent. You stand. The memory fades. The present returns. Time to begin the performance. You follow the slave to the bathing room. It's not a full bathhouse. You'll visit the public baths later, because being seen at the baths is part of the job. But it's adequate. A large basin. Heated water. Oils and strigils arranged on a nearby table. The slave helps you undress. You stand there while he works. This should feel intimate. Vulnerable. It doesn't. You've been doing this for so long that it's just routine. Your body is a tool. A political instrument. It needs to be maintained. Presented correctly. That's all. The water is hot. Almost too hot. You ease into it. The heat helps. Loosens muscles that have been tense since you woke. Maybe since you went to sleep. You're not sure anymore where the tension ends, and you begin. The slave washes you. Methodically. Professionally. He's done this 1,000 times. Knows exactly how much pressure to use. Where to focus. How to be thorough without being intrusive. You close your eyes. Let him work. Your mind doesn't stop. Can't stop. It's already running through the morning meeting. Who will be there? What they'll want. What you need to say to maintain your position without overcommitting to any particular faction. The younger senator will probably be there. The dangerous one. You'll need to gauge his support. See who's aligning with him. Decide whether he's someone you can work with, or someone you need to quietly undermine before he becomes a real problem. There's also the matter of the grain distribution. Boring. Technical. Exactly the kind of issue that seems unimportant until it becomes a crisis. The urban poor need bread. The grain supply needs to be managed. Someone needs to take responsibility for making sure the system works. That someone is never you. You're too senior for that kind of administrative drudgery. But you need to have an opinion about it. Need to support the right proposal. Need to be seen as engaged without being seen as desperate for relevance. It's exhausting. All of it. The constant calculation. The performance of wisdom. The pretense that any of this matters. The slave finishes washing you. Helps you out of the basin. Begins the process of oiling your skin. This part takes time. The oil needs to be applied correctly. Rubbed in thoroughly. Your skin needs to look healthy. Prosperous. Like someone who has the leisure and resources to take care of himself. Because that's what power looks like in Rome. Not strength. Not competence. Leisure. The appearance of having so much time and money that you can spend hours on grooming. The slave works the oil into your shoulders, your back, your arms. The scent is pleasant, expensive, something imported. You don't remember what. Don't really care. It's just part of the costume. Your body is in good shape. Not military shape. Those days are gone. But respectable. You're not fat. Not soft. You still have the discipline to maintain yourself. To exercise. To eat moderately. Mostly because losing your physical presence would be another sign of weakness. Another thing for rivals to notice and exploit. Everything is a signal. Everything is performance. The slave moves to your legs, your feet. Thorough. Professional. You stand there and let him work. You think about the toga you'll wear today. The formal one. Pure white. Expensive wool. The kind that announces your status before you say a word. Togas are absurd. Let's be clear about that. They're heavy. Awkward. Difficult to put on correctly. Impossible to move in naturally. They exist purely to demonstrate that you don't need to do physical labor, that you have slaves to dress you and adjust the folds and make sure you look appropriately senatorial. It's a costume. Everyone knows it's a costume. But the costume is mandatory. Show up to the Senate in a tunic and you might as well announce you're resigning. The slave finishes with the oil, brings a towel, pats you dry with the same methodical efficiency he's applied to everything else. Another slave appears. This one carries your clothes, the undertunic, the toga, the shoes. Everything laid out in the correct order. They dress you. It takes two of them. The toga requires precision. The folds need to fall correctly. The drape needs to be perfect. One shoulder covered, one arm free. The fabric arranged to suggest dignity and authority, and all the other abstract qualities that Roman political life supposedly embodies. You stand there, arms out, letting them work. This is your armor. Not metal, not leather, wool. Arranged correctly. Signaling that you belong, that you're part of the system, that you understand the rules. They finish. Step back. One of them adjusts a final fold. Nods. You're ready. You look at yourself in the polished bronze mirror. The reflection is distorted, imperfect. But you can see enough. You look like a senator, like someone important, like someone whose opinion matters. The person looking back at you is a stranger. But that's fine. That's the point. You leave the bathing room, move through your house toward the atrium. The atrium is where you receive clients, where people come to ask favors, to seek your support, to be seen associating with your name. It's early, but they're already waiting. There are always people waiting. You enter the atrium. The clients are arranged in a loose group, maybe a dozen of them. Some you recognize, some you don't. All of them here because they need something from you. They straighten when you appear, arrange their faces into expressions of respect, deference, gratitude for your time. You nod. Gracious. Magnanimous. The performance begins. The first client approaches. A merchant. Middle-aged. Successful enough to afford decent clothes, but not successful enough to have real power. He needs a letter of recommendation. Something to help his son secure a minor administrative position. You listen. Nod. Ask a few questions that demonstrate you're paying attention without actually caring about the answers. The merchant is nervous, grateful. He knows this is a transaction. He's asking for a favor. He'll owe you. That's how it works. That's how everything works. You agree to write the letter. The merchant thanks you. Effusive. Excessive. You accept the gratitude with the same gracious detachment you've perfected over years of these morning audiences. He leaves. The next client approaches. This one is younger. A distant relative. Someone connected to your family through marriage or blood, or one of those complicated Roman kinship networks that everyone pretends to understand. He needs money. Doesn't say it directly. That would be crude. Instead, he talks about an investment opportunity, a business venture, something that requires capital and will definitely pay returns. You've heard this before, many times. The investment is probably real. The returns are probably exaggerated. The real ask is whether you're willing to support this relative, to demonstrate family loyalty, to maintain the network of obligation that holds your social position together. You agree to consider it, which means no, but you say it in a way that sounds like maybe. That preserves his dignity. That keeps the relationship intact. He thanks you, leaves. The next client approaches. This continues, one after another, each with their own request, their own need, their own calculation about whether you're worth cultivating. You perform interest, perform generosity, perform the role of patron, of someone with the power to help, the wisdom to guide, the resources to share. It's exhausting, but it's necessary. These clients are part of your political base, part of the network that supports your position. You need them as much as they need you, maybe more. The last client finishes, leaves. You're alone in the atrium. Not really alone. Slaves are everywhere. But they don't count. They're furniture, part of the architecture. Present, but not present. You stand there for a moment. The morning light is starting to filter through the opening in the roof. The impluvium, the shallow pool in the center of the atrium, reflects the light, creates patterns on the walls. It's beautiful. Objectively, the kind of beauty that costs money and demonstrates taste. You feel nothing looking at it. Your mind is already moving forward. To the meeting, to the Senate session, to the dinner tonight that you're required to attend. The day stretches ahead, full of obligations, full of performance, full of the constant calculation that passes for political life. You think about the military camp again. Can't help it. The memory keeps surfacing, keeps reminding you of what you left behind. You were nobody there, just another junior officer, replaceable, unimportant. But you were also free, free from this, from the constant performance, from the anxiety that never stops, from the knowledge that one wrong word could end everything you've built. You made a choice. Came back to Rome, started climbing. Everyone said it was the right choice. Maybe it was. By the metrics that matter, wealth, status, influence, you've succeeded. You've become exactly what you set out to become. The fact that it feels like failure is probably just ingratitude, weakness, the kind of self-indulgent doubt that successful people aren't supposed to feel. You push the thought away. Again, like you always do. Time to go. The meeting is waiting. The Senate is waiting. The performance is waiting. You leave your house. Step into the street. Rome in the early morning is already awake, already moving. The city never stops, never rests. Just cycles through different versions of itself depending on the hour. Your slaves follow. A small entourage. Enough to demonstrate status without being ostentatious. You've calculated this. like you've calculated everything. The streets are crowded. You move through them with practiced ease. People recognize you. Step aside. Nod respectfully. You acknowledge them with the minimum courtesy required. Being seen is part of the job. Being accessible, or appearing accessible, is part of the performance. The people need to believe their senators care about them, that their concerns matter, that the system works. You don't care about them. Not really. You care about maintaining the appearance of caring, which is close enough. The meeting location is a private home. Another senator's house, larger than yours, more expensive. A reminder that you're successful, but not the most successful. Powerful, but not the most powerful. You arrive, are admitted. Move through the atrium to a private room where the others are already gathering. There are 6 of them, all senators, all roughly your age and status, all here for the same reason: to coordinate, to align, to make sure the official Senate session goes the way it's supposed to go. You exchange greetings, perform collegiality, take your seat. The younger senator is here, the dangerous one. He's sitting across from you. Confident, relaxed, like he belongs. He probably does. That's the problem. The meeting begins. Someone, an older senator, more experienced, better connected, starts talking about the grain distribution, the technical details, the political implications, who supports what, who's vulnerable. You listen, nod occasionally, contribute when expected. The conversation is coded. Careful. Everyone here knows the real discussion is happening beneath the words. In the pauses. In who agrees with whom. In who stays silent. The younger senator speaks. His points are good, well reasoned. He's done his homework, understands the issue, proposes a solution that's practical and politically viable. Everyone nods, agrees. He's impressive, competent, exactly the kind of rising talent that makes older senators nervous. You watch him, calculate. He's not a threat yet, but he will be. In a few years, maybe sooner, you'll need to decide how to handle that. Cultivate him as an ally, or undermine him before he becomes competition. The meeting continues. Other issues are discussed. Other alignments are negotiated. The whole thing takes about an hour. Then it's over. Everyone stands. Exchanges final pleasantries. Prepares to move to the Senate. You walk with the others, a small group moving through the streets, being seen together, demonstrating unity, strength, all the things that political alliances are supposed to project. The Senate building is impressive, large, marble, the kind of architecture that announces importance, that reminds everyone who enters that they're part of something larger than themselves. You've been here 1,000 times. It stopped being impressive years ago. You enter, move through the corridors. The building is filling up. Senators arriving, greeting each other, performing the social rituals that precede the actual session. You see rivals, allies, people whose position you can't quite determine. You nod to all of them. Maintain the appropriate level of courtesy. Never too warm, never too cold. The younger senator is talking to someone, another rising politician. They're laughing, relaxed. Like this is easy. It probably is easy for them. They haven't learned yet, haven't accumulated enough mistakes, enough enemies, enough reasons to be anxious. You move past them. Find your seat. The Senate chamber is filling up. The noise level rises. Conversations overlapping. The sound of several hundred men all trying to be heard. The session begins. A magistrate calls for order. The noise gradually subsides. Not silence. Never silence. But something approaching it. The first item on the agenda is announced. The grain distribution. Exactly what you discussed in the morning meeting. A senator stands. Begins speaking. His speech is prepared. Rehearsed. He's making the case for a particular approach to managing the grain supply. The approach you all agreed on this morning. You listen. Or appear to listen. Your mind is elsewhere. Running through calculations. Thinking about the dinner tonight. About the younger senator. About a dozen other things that have nothing to do with grain. The speech continues. It's competent. Boring. Exactly what it needs to be. Other senators speak. Some supporting. Some raising minor objections that have been pre-negotiated. The whole thing is choreographed. Everyone knows their role. This is what the Senate actually is. Not the dramatic debates you imagine. Not the clash of great minds shaping the fate of the empire. Just administrative theatre. Bureaucracy with togas. The real decisions were made this morning. In private. In that room with 6 senators coordinating their positions. This is just the official record. The performance for posterity. You sit there, maintaining the appropriate expression. Engaged, but not too engaged. Thoughtful, but not troubled. The face you've learned to wear. Hours pass. The grain issue is resolved. Exactly as planned. The Senate moves on to the next item. Aqueduct repairs. Funding for a temple restoration. A minor dispute about provincial taxation. All of it important. Technically. All of it requiring attention and debate and careful consideration. All of it mind-numbingly boring. You think about your first year in the Senate. How excited you were. How honored. You'd made it. Climbed the cursus honorum. Achieved the position you'd been working toward for years. You thought the Senate would be impressive. Thought you'd be shaping policy. Making decisions that mattered. Contributing to the governance of the greatest empire in the world. Instead, you're sitting through 6 hours of debate about aqueduct repairs. The disillusionment was gradual, not a single moment. Just a slow accumulation of sessions like this. Of realizing that most of what the Senate does is administrative maintenance. That the real power is elsewhere. With the emperor. With his advisors. With the people who actually make decisions while the Senate performs legitimacy. You're not powerless. You have influence. Connections. The ability to help or hurt people's careers. That's worth something. But it's not what you thought it would be. Not what you imagined when you were 23. And ambitious and stupid enough to think political power meant something. The session continues. You contribute when expected. Speak briefly about the aqueduct issue. Make a point that's been carefully calculated to sound wise without committing you to anything specific. Other senators nod. Agree. Your contribution is noted. You sit down. The performance continues. Eventually, finally, the session ends. The magistrate dismisses the Senate. Everyone stands. Begins moving toward the exits. The noise level rises again. Conversations resuming. Plans being made for the rest of the day. You move with the crowd. Not rushing, not lingering. Just moving at the appropriate pace. The younger senator is near the exit. Talking to someone. He sees you. Nods. Respectful. Appropriate. You nod back. Maintain the pleasant neutrality that passes for collegiality. He's dangerous. You're sure of it now. Not because he's hostile. Because he's competent. Because he reminds you of yourself before you learn to be afraid. You'll need to watch him. Carefully. You exit the Senate building. The afternoon sun is bright. Hot. Rome in summer is unpleasant. The heat sits heavy. Makes the toga feel even more oppressive than usual. You need to be seen in the forum. Need to make an appearance. Demonstrate accessibility. Maintain your public presence. It's part of the job. The part nobody talks about but everyone understands. Political power in Rome isn't just about the Senate. It's about being visible, being known, being the kind of person ordinary Romans recognize and respect. You move toward the forum. Your slaves follow. The crowd parts slightly. People recognize you. Some nod. Some call out greetings. You acknowledge them. Gracious. Approachable. The performance continues. The forum is crowded. Always crowded. It's the center of Roman public life. The place where business happens. Where people gather. Where the city performs itself. You move through it slowly. Deliberately. Being seen. Stopping occasionally to speak with someone. A merchant. A minor official. A citizen who wants to complain about something. You listen. Nod. Express appropriate concern. Promise to look into it. Knowing you won't. Knowing they know you won't. But the performance matters. The appearance of caring matters. A man approaches. Older. Respectably dressed. He has a complaint about a legal matter. Something about property rights. A dispute with a neighbor. You listen. The details are complicated. Boring. The kind of thing that would require actual investigation to resolve properly. You express sympathy. Suggest he speak with a praetor. Offer to write a letter of introduction. The man thanks you. Effusive. Grateful. You've done nothing. Solved nothing. But you've performed concern. Demonstrated accessibility. That's what matters. The afternoon continues. More conversations. More performances. More of the exhausting social maintenance that political life requires. You think about your quaestorship, your first elected position. 20 years ago, maybe 21. The details blur. You were assigned to a province, somewhere in the east. Your job was to manage finances, collect taxes, oversee expenditures, make sure the provincial administration functioned properly. It was boring, technical, exactly the kind of unglamorous work that ambitious young Romans had to do to prove they were serious, competent, worthy of advancement. You hated it. The endless accounting. The petty disputes. The constant need to balance competing interests while maintaining the appearance of fairness. But you learned how the system actually worked. Learned that governance was mostly about managing money and keeping records and making sure nobody stole too much. Learned that fairness was a luxury. That the real job was maintaining stability. Keeping the province functional. Ensuring the tax revenue kept flowing back to Rome. You made compromises, small ones at first. A merchant who needed a favor. A local official who deserved some flexibility. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that felt like corruption. Just practical adjustments. The kind that made the system work better. That kept everyone happy. That demonstrated you understood how things actually functioned. Each compromise made the next one easier. made the line between proper administration and improper favoritism harder to see. By the end of your term, you'd become good at it. Good at managing the grey areas. Good at knowing which rules to enforce and which to ignore. Good at maintaining the appearance of integrity while doing what needed to be done. You came back to Rome with a reputation. Competent. Practical. Someone who got things done. Someone who understood how the system worked. It was exactly what you needed. The quaestorship was a success. The next step on the cursus honorum was waiting. You didn't think about the compromises, didn't dwell on the small corruptions. Everyone did it. That's what you told yourself. That's what everyone told you. And it was true. Everyone did do it. The system required it. Required flexibility. Required understanding that the rules were guidelines, and the real job was making things work. You were just being practical. Just being effective. Just doing what successful Romans did. The fact that you'd become someone you wouldn't have recognized 5 years earlier didn't seem important. Didn't seem worth examining. You were climbing. That's what mattered. You were succeeding. You were becoming the person you'd set out to become. The forum is starting to empty. The afternoon is fading. You've been seen. Performed accessibility. Done your duty. Time to go home. To rest. To prepare for tonight. You return to your house. The walk is familiar. Automatic. Your mind is elsewhere. Already thinking about the dinner. About who will be there. About what you need to say and what you need to avoid saying. You arrive home. Enter. Move through the atrium to your private rooms. Your spouse is there, sitting, reading something. They look up when you enter. You exchange greetings. Brief. Efficient. The kind of communication that long marriages develop. Minimal words. Maximum information. They remind you about tonight. The dinner. Who's hosting? Who else will be there? What you need to know. You nod. You already know all of this. But the reminder is part of the routine. Part of the way you coordinate. Part of the partnership that your marriage has become. It's not romantic, hasn't been for years. But it's functional, effective. You support each other's political positions. Maintain the appropriate social presence. Fulfill the obligations that come with your status. That's enough. That's all it needs to be. Your spouse leaves. You're alone. You sit. Remove the toga. The relief is immediate. Physical. The weight lifting. The constriction easing. You sit there in your undertunic, just breathing, just existing without performing. This is the only time you're not performing. These brief moments alone. Between obligations. Between performances. You think about your praetorship, the position you held before entering the Senate, the magistracy that proved you were serious, capable, worthy of real power. You were a praetor for 1 year. Your job was to administer justice, to hear cases, to make rulings, to interpret law and apply it to specific situations. It should have been straightforward. The law is the law. Justice is justice. You apply the rules. You make fair decisions. Except it wasn't that simple. It was never that simple. The law was complicated, full of contradictions, full of grey areas, full of situations where different principles conflicted and you had to choose which one mattered more. And the people bringing cases weren't abstract legal problems. They were Romans with connections. with influence, with the ability to help or hurt your career. You learned quickly that fairness was contextual, that justice meant knowing which rules to apply strictly and which to interpret flexibly, that the real job wasn't applying the law. It was maintaining social order while advancing your political position. A wealthy merchant brought a case, a dispute with a competitor. The law was clear. The merchant was wrong. You should have ruled against him. But the merchant had connections, supported the right people, could be useful. And the competitor was nobody. No influence, no power, no ability to help or hurt you. You ruled for the merchant, found a legal justification, made it sound reasonable, made it sound like justice. It wasn't justice. It was politics. But that's what the praetorship was. Politics wearing the costume of justice. You told yourself it didn't matter, that the individual case was less important than maintaining your position, that you could do more good in the long run by advancing your career than by making one fair ruling that would cost you politically. You told yourself a lot of things. The year continued. More cases. More compromises. More moments where you chose political advantage over legal principle. You got good at it. Good at finding justifications. Good at making unfair rulings sound fair. Good at maintaining the appearance of justice while serving political interests. By the end of your praetorship, you had a reputation. Fair but practical. Wise but not rigid. Someone who understood that law existed to serve society, not the other way around. It was exactly the reputation you needed. It opened doors, created opportunities, positioned you for the Senate. You didn't think about the people you'd ruled against unfairly, didn't think about the cases where you'd chosen politics over justice, didn't think about what you'd become. You were succeeding. That's what mattered. You were climbing. You were becoming powerful. The fact that power required becoming someone you wouldn't have respected 10 years earlier didn't seem important. You sit there, alone, the toga discarded, the performance temporarily suspended. You're tired. Not physically. Physically, you're fine. But mentally, spiritually, whatever word describes the exhaustion that comes from constant performance, from constant calculation, from never being able to stop thinking about how everything you do affects your position. You close your eyes, just for a moment, just to rest. But your mind won't stop, won't let you rest. It's already moving forward. To tonight, to the dinner, to the next performance. You think about your mentor, the senator who helped you, who taught you, who showed you how the system actually worked. He was older, much older, near the end of his career when you met him. He'd been a consul, had held real power, had survived decades of political life. He took an interest in you, saw potential, decided to invest in your career. You met in his home. Private conversations. Away from the Senate. Away from public scrutiny. He taught you things they don't teach in the cursus honorum. Things you're supposed to learn by observation, by experience, by making mistakes and surviving them. He taught you about the emperor, about how to read his moods, about how to support him without appearing sycophantic, about how to maintain independence without appearing disloyal. The emperor is everything. That's what your mentor said. The emperor is the source of all power, all advancement, all danger. The Senate is theatre. The emperor is reality. You need to understand that. need to accept it, need to learn to navigate it. Your mentor taught you how, taught you which advisors mattered, which courtiers had influence, which signals to watch for. Taught you that political survival meant understanding that the rules everyone talked about weren't the rules that actually mattered, that the real rules were unwritten, unspoken, understood only by people who'd survived long enough to learn them. He taught you about loyalty, about how to build it, how to maintain it, how to use it. Loyalty isn't about friendship. It's about obligation, about creating situations where people owe you, where they need you, where betraying you would cost them more than supporting you. You build loyalty through favors, through helping people advance, through being useful, through making yourself necessary. And you maintain loyalty by reminding people what you've done for them, by making sure they understand that their success is connected to yours, that your fall would be their fall. It's not friendship. It's not trust. It's mutual self-interest formalized into something that looks like loyalty. Your mentor was good at it. Very good. He'd built a network that had sustained him for decades, that had protected him through multiple emperors, that had made him too useful to destroy. He taught you to build the same thing, to think long-term, to invest in relationships, to create obligations. He also taught you about enemies, about how to identify them, how to neutralize them, how to destroy them when necessary. Enemies are inevitable. That's what he said. You can't avoid making enemies. The question is whether you make them deliberately or accidentally. Deliberate enemies are manageable. You know who they are. You know why they oppose you. You can plan accordingly. Accidental enemies are dangerous. They're people you've offended without realizing it. People who have grievances you don't know about. People who are working against you while you're not paying attention. The key is awareness. Constant awareness. Always knowing who might be a threat. Always watching for signs of opposition. Always being ready to respond. Your mentor taught you how to undermine enemies, how to spread rumors, how to damage reputations, how to make someone's position untenable without being obviously responsible. It's not dramatic. It's not violent. It's just careful, patient destruction. A word here, a suggestion there, a pattern of small actions that accumulate into ruin. He was good at it. You watched him destroy several careers, watched him do it so subtly that the victims never quite understood what had happened, just found themselves gradually isolated, gradually losing support, gradually becoming irrelevant. You learned. You absorbed. You became his student in the art of political survival. He died 3 years ago. Old age. Natural causes. A good death by Roman standards. You gave the eulogy. Praised his wisdom, his service, his dedication to Rome. You meant some of it. He had been wise. He had taught you things you needed to know. He had helped you survive. But you also understood what he'd made you, what you'd become under his guidance. You'd become him. Calculating, cynical, willing to do whatever was necessary to maintain your position. You'd become someone who understood that politics wasn't about principle. It was about survival, about power, about maintaining your position in a system that would destroy you the moment you showed weakness. You'd become successful, powerful, respected. You'd also become someone you wouldn't have recognized 20 years ago, someone you wouldn't have liked, someone you wouldn't have trusted. But that's what success required. That's what your mentor taught you. That's what you learned. You open your eyes. The room is darker. The afternoon is fading. You need to prepare for dinner. You stand. Call for slaves. Begin the process of dressing again. The toga. The performance. The costume. Tonight will be important. A dinner at a rival's house. Not an enemy. Not exactly. But someone whose interests don't always align with yours. Someone you need to watch. Someone who's watching you. The dinner will be elaborate. Expensive. Multiple courses. Good wine. Entertainment. All the trappings of wealth and status. And underneath it all, the real purpose. The political maneuvering. The careful conversations. The alliances being tested. The positions being negotiated. You'll need to be careful. Need to read the room. Need to say the right things without committing to anything you'll regret. The slaves finish dressing you. You're ready. You look like a senator again, like someone important. The person in the mirror is a stranger, but you're used to that by now. You leave your house. Your spouse accompanies you. Together, you move through the evening streets toward the dinner. Rome at night is different, quieter, darker. The respectable people are indoors. The streets belong to slaves and workers and people who have no choice but to be out. You move through them. Your slaves carry torches, light the way, announce your presence. You arrive at the house. It's impressive, larger than yours, more elaborate, a reminder of where you stand in the hierarchy. You're admitted. Move through the atrium to the dining room. Other guests are already there, reclining on couches, drinking wine, talking. You exchange greetings, perform warmth, take your assigned place. The seating is strategic. You're positioned near the host, but not next to him. Near enough to be included in important conversations, far enough to not be seen as his closest ally. It's calculated. Everything is calculated. The younger senator is here, the dangerous one. He's across the room, talking to someone, laughing, comfortable. You watch him, careful not to stare, just observing, gathering information. The dinner begins. Slaves bring food, course after course, elaborate preparations, expensive ingredients, everything designed to demonstrate wealth and taste. You eat, not much. Eating too much would be undignified, but enough to be polite, to participate in the social ritual. The conversation flows. Politics, gossip, observations about mutual acquaintances. Nothing too serious, not yet. The real conversations happen later, after the wine has flowed, after people have relaxed. You contribute when appropriate. Make observations that are clever but not too clever. Demonstrate engagement without dominating. Your spouse is nearby, talking to other spouses, performing their own social role. You're a team, coordinating without needing to communicate directly. The wine is good, very good. You drink moderately, enough to appear relaxed, not enough to lose control. Control is everything. You can never fully relax. Never let your guard down. Never stop calculating. The younger senator is talking now, telling a story about something. The details don't matter. What matters is how he tells it. Confident, engaging, natural. People are listening, laughing, responding. He's good at this. Good at the social performance. Good at making people like him. That's dangerous. Likability is power. People support people they like, trust people they like, advance people they like. You're not likable. Not really. You're respected, feared maybe, but not liked. The younger senator is liked. That gives him an advantage you don't have. You'll need to counter that. Somehow. You're not sure how yet, but you'll figure it out. The dinner continues. More courses, more wine, more conversation. Someone mentions the grain distribution, the issue from this morning's Senate session. The conversation shifts, becomes more serious, more political. This is it. This is the real purpose of the dinner. The social performance was just preparation. Now, the actual work begins. People start expressing opinions, testing positions, seeing who agrees with whom, who's aligned, who's vulnerable. You listen. Contribute carefully. Your position is already known. You stated it this morning, but you need to reinforce it, need to demonstrate consistency, need to show you're reliable. The younger senator speaks. His position is slightly different from yours. Not opposed, just different. A nuance. A variation. It's clever. He's not challenging you directly, just offering an alternative, showing that he's thoughtful, independent, not just following the established positions. Other people nod. Consider his point. Some agree, some don't. But they're taking him seriously. You feel something. Not quite fear. Not quite anger. Something between them. A recognition that this is a challenge. Subtle. Indirect. But real. You respond. Carefully. Acknowledge his point. Suggest why your position is still preferable. Make it sound like you're building on his idea rather than contradicting it. It's a delicate move. You're asserting your position without appearing defensive, demonstrating authority without appearing threatened. The conversation continues. Other topics, other positions. The political maneuvering continues through multiple subjects. You participate. Carefully. Always aware of who's listening, who's agreeing, who's staying silent. Your spouse catches your eye. A brief glance. A signal. They've noticed something. Someone said something. You need to pay attention. You focus. Listen more carefully. Someone, another senator, older, well-connected, is talking about the emperor, about a recent decision, about what it might mean. The tone is careful, respectful, but there's something underneath. A criticism. Subtle, indirect, but present. This is dangerous. Criticizing the emperor, even indirectly, even subtly, is always dangerous. The wrong person hears it, reports it. Suddenly, you're under investigation. Suddenly, your career is over. But the senator is saying it anyway. Testing. Seeing who agrees. Seeing who's willing to express similar concerns. It's a trap. Maybe. Or maybe it's genuine. Maybe he's trying to build a coalition. Maybe he's trying to identify allies. Or maybe he's working for the emperor. Testing loyalty. Identifying potential problems. You can't know. That's the problem. You can never know. Every conversation is potentially dangerous. Every opinion is potentially fatal. You stay silent. Don't agree. Don't disagree. Just listen. Neutral. Careful. Others respond. Some agree. Carefully. Some change the subject. Some stay silent like you. The younger senator speaks. He defends the emperor. Gently. respectfully. But clearly, he's not taking the bait, not joining the criticism. It's smart, safe, the right move. You feel something again. That same uncomfortable recognition. He's better at this than you were at his age. More careful, more aware. He's going to be a problem. You're certain now. The conversation moves on. The dangerous moment passes. The dinner continues. But you're shaken. Not visibly. You're too practiced for that. But internally. That moment of uncertainty, of not knowing whether you were witnessing genuine dissent or a loyalty test. That's what political life is. Constant uncertainty, constant danger, constant calculation. You're tired. So tired. Not physically, but mentally, spiritually. Whatever word describes the exhaustion of never being able to relax, never being able to trust, never being able to stop performing. The dinner is winding down. The food is finished. The wine is still flowing. But people are starting to make departure noises. You stand. Thank the host. Perform gratitude. Exchange final pleasantries with other guests. The younger senator approaches, speaks to you, respectful, appropriate, thanks you for your comments during the discussion. You respond, gracious, compliment his contributions, maintain the appearance of collegiality, but you're watching him, calculating, trying to determine whether he's a potential ally or a definite threat. You can't tell, not yet. You'll need more information, more observation, more time. You leave. Your spouse beside you. Your slaves following. The torches lighting the way through dark streets. The walk home is quiet. You're both tired. Both processing. Both thinking about what was said, what was implied, what it means. You arrive home. Enter. Move through the familiar spaces to your private rooms. You remove the toga. Again. The relief is immediate. Again. You sit. Your spouse sits nearby. You discuss the dinner. Briefly. Efficiently. Comparing observations. Sharing information. They notice things you didn't. You notice things they didn't. Together you construct a more complete picture. The senator who criticized the emperor. The younger senator's response. The various alignments and tensions. The undercurrents. You discuss strategy. How to respond. What to do next. How to position yourselves. It's practical. Tactical. The kind of conversation you've had 1,000 times. Then your spouse leaves, goes to their own room. You're alone. You sit there, in the dark, too tired to sleep, too wired to rest. Your mind won't stop, won't let you rest. It keeps cycling, keeps processing, keeps calculating. You think about the young officer you were. The one who woke up in a military tent in Germania. The one who checked his soldiers' boots and made sure they had enough food. That person is gone. Completely gone. You can barely remember what it felt like to be him. You remember the clarity, the simplicity, the sense of purpose. You remember thinking that real life was waiting for you in Rome. That military service was just preparation. That the Senate was where you'd finally do something important. You were wrong. About all of it. The military was real life. The clear purpose. The honest work. The satisfaction of completing tasks that had measurable outcomes. Rome is the performance. The anxiety. the constant calculation, the exhausting pretense that any of this matters. You've succeeded. By every measure that Romans used to define success, you've succeeded. You're wealthy, powerful, respected. Your opinion matters. Your support is sought. Your opposition is feared. You've achieved everything you set out to achieve. And it feels like failure. Not because you failed, but because success doesn't feel like you thought it would, doesn't provide the satisfaction you expected, doesn't fill the space you thought it would fill. You're just tired, constantly performing, constantly calculating, constantly afraid of making the wrong move. You think about your mentor, about what he taught you, about what you became under his guidance. He taught you to survive, to succeed, to navigate the system, to build power and maintain it. He didn't teach you to be happy, didn't teach you to find meaning, didn't teach you to feel satisfied. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe he was just as tired, just as empty, just as trapped in the performance. Maybe that's what success is. In Rome, in politics, in this life you've chosen. Maybe the comfortable cage is all there is. Maybe the performance is all there is. Maybe the constant calculation is all there is. You sit there, alone, in the dark, thinking about the young officer who thought he was preparing for real life. You want to tell him something, warn him, explain what's coming, but you can't. He's gone. That person doesn't exist anymore. You killed him, gradually, through 1,000 small compromises, through 1,000 calculated decisions, through the slow process of becoming successful. You became what you needed to become. You did what you needed to do. You made the choices that led here. And here is a dark room. Alone. Exhausted. Successful. Empty. The night is quiet. Rome is as quiet as it ever gets. You can hear distant sounds, voices, movement. The city continuing. You should sleep, need to sleep. Tomorrow will bring more obligations, more performances, more calculations. But you can't sleep. Your mind won't stop, won't let you rest. You think about the younger senator, about how he reminds you of yourself, about how he's going to climb, going to succeed, going to become what you are. You wonder if he'll end up here, in a dark room, alone, successful, empty, probably. That's how it works. That's what the system does. It takes ambitious young men and turns them into tired old men who've forgotten why they wanted power in the first place. You're not old, not yet, but you're tired, so tired. You think about the cursus honorum, the ladder you climbed. Quaestor, praetor, senator. Each step seemed important. Each step seemed like progress. But progress toward what? Toward this. Toward sitting alone in the dark, wondering what the point was. You achieved the positions, gained the power, earned the respect. And none of it means anything. Not really. Not in the way you thought it would. The emperor has the real power. You're just part of the performance. Part of the system that maintains the illusion of republican government, while actual power is concentrated elsewhere. You know this. Everyone knows this. But you all pretend, all perform, all maintain the fiction. Because the alternative is admitting that everything you've worked for is meaningless. that the Senate is theatre, that your power is illusory, that you've spent your life climbing a ladder that leads nowhere. You can't admit that, can't face that, so you keep performing, keep calculating, keep pretending it matters. The night continues. You sit there, exhausted but unable to sleep, successful but unable to feel satisfied, powerful but unable to feel free. This is what you wanted. This is what you worked for. This is what you achieved. This is success. And it feels like the most elaborate failure you could have designed. The darkness is starting to fade. Not much, just slightly. The first hint of dawn approaching. Another day is coming. Another round of obligations. Another performance. You'll wake. You'll dress. You'll receive clients. You'll go to the Senate. You'll perform engagement. You'll calculate. You'll maintain your position. You'll do it all again. Because that's what you do. That's who you are. That's what success requires. The young officer in Germania is gone. The ambitious quaestor is gone. The idealistic praetor is gone. You're what's left. The successful senator. The powerful man. The person who achieved everything and feels nothing. You sit there, waiting for dawn, waiting for the performance to begin again. This is your life. This is what you chose. This is what you became. The comfortable cage. The golden prison. The successful failure. This is what power feels like. And it feels like nothing at all. Let's talk about how you got here. Because the path to the Senate wasn't some mysterious journey or stroke of luck. It was a ladder. A very specific ladder. With very specific rungs. And every single one of them was designed to exhaust you. The Romans called it the cursus honorum, the course of honours, which is a nice way of saying the bureaucratic meat grinder that turns ambitious young men into hollow political operators. You started at the bottom. Everyone did. Well, everyone who mattered. If you were born poor, forget it. The cursus honorum wasn't for you. This was a ladder for the wealthy, the connected, the ones whose families already had a foot in the door. First rung, military service. You needed it, not optional. You couldn't hold political office without proving you'd bled for Rome, so you went. Spent your late teens and early 20s in some godforsaken province, learning how to kill people and follow orders. You came back with scars, nightmares, and the qualification to enter politics. Congratulations. You survived. Now, the real exhaustion begins. Next, quaestor. Your first elected position. You're in your late 20s, maybe 30. You manage finances, provincial budgets, military supply chains, grain distributions. Thrilling stuff. You're not making policy. You're not debating in the Senate. You're an accountant with a fancy title, learning how the bureaucratic machine actually works, learning who to bribe, who to flatter, who to avoid. You do this for a year, maybe 2. Then you wait, because there's a mandatory gap between officers. You can't just climb straight up. The system forces you to pause, to marinate in your ambition, to spend years networking, building alliances, attending dinners, performing gratitude to the men above you. Then, if you're lucky and connected, and haven't pissed off anyone important, adile. You're in your mid-30s now. Your job is to manage public works, roads, aqueducts, temples, and, This is the fun part. You're expected to fund public games out of your own pocket. Gladiatorial contests, chariot races, theatrical performances. The people need bread and circuses, and you're paying for the circuses. This bankrupts some men. Seriously. You go into debt financing spectacles, so the common people will remember your name when you run for higher office. It's an investment, a gamble. You're buying popularity with money you might not have, hoping it pays off later. Another mandatory gap: more waiting, more networking, more dinners where you smile at people you'd like to strangle. Then, praetor. You're in your late 30s, maybe 40. You're administering justice now, presiding over courts, interpreting law, making decisions that affect lives and property and reputations. You're important, visible, one step away from the top. And this is where it gets dangerous. Because now you're a threat. Now you have enough power that other ambitious men see you as competition. Now you have to watch your back. Constantly. Another gap. More waiting. More calculation. And finally, if you survive the politics and the backstabbing and the financial ruin and the constant performance, consul, the top, the pinnacle. You're in your early to mid-40s. You've spent 2 decades climbing this ladder. You're exhausted, paranoid, probably in debt, definitely compromised by every favor you've traded and every alliance you've made. You've won. You're at the top of Roman political life, and you realize the top is just another performance, another obligation, another year of pretending you have power while actually serving the emperor's interests and managing the Senate's endless bureaucratic tedium. Then your year ends. You're a former consul now, still prestigious, still important, but no longer at the peak. You spend the rest of your life trying to maintain relevance, trying to stay visible, trying not to be forgotten. This is the cursus honorum. This is the ladder every ambitious Roman climbed, a system designed to take decades of your life, drain your wealth, test your endurance, and reward you with exhaustion and paranoia. The trap isn't that you might fail. The trap is that you might succeed. Because success means you spent your entire adult life climbing toward a destination that turns out to be another starting point for a different kind of struggle. The struggle to stay relevant, to stay alive, to keep performing. You wanted power. You got a costume and a script and a stage full of people who'd kill you if you missed your cue. That's the cursus honorum. That's the ladder. That's what you climbed. And now you're sitting in the dark, wondering why the view from the top looks exactly like a cage. Now let's talk about how power actually worked in Rome. Because if you think it was about laws or institutions or formal government structures, you're adorable. That's not how any of this functioned. Power in Rome ran on obligation, personal obligation. The patron-client system, a web of mutual dependency that made the entire society function, while also making everyone constantly anxious about their position within it. Here's how it worked. You, as a wealthy, powerful man, had clients, lots of them. These were men of lower status who depended on you for favors, protection, recommendations, financial support, legal assistance. They'd show up at your house every morning, stand in your atrium, wait for you to acknowledge them, receive whatever small favor or coin or word of encouragement you decided to give. In exchange, they owed you. They voted how you wanted. They showed up when you needed a crowd. They spread your reputation. They defended your name in public. They were your political base, your street-level operatives, your proof of importance. You weren't paying them a salary. You weren't signing contracts. You were building a network of people who owed you and who knew that if they stopped being useful, you'd stop being generous. This wasn't friendship. Let's be clear. This was transactional loyalty. You helped them because it benefited you. They served you because they had no better option. And here's the thing, you were also someone's client. Because unless you were the emperor, and you're not, you had a patron, someone more powerful than you, someone whose favor you needed, someone you visited in the morning, just like your clients visited you. You owed them. They protected you, recommended you for positions, spoke well of you to the right people, kept you from being prosecuted when you bent the rules. In exchange, you voted their way, supported their interests, brought your own clients to their causes. Everyone was both patron and client. Everyone owed someone and was owed by someone. The whole system was a pyramid of obligation, with the emperor at the top and slaves at the bottom, and everyone in between constantly managing their relationships up and down the chain. This is how laws got passed, not through debate or principle or the formal mechanisms of government, through networks of obligation. You wanted a law passed? You called in favors, reminded people what you'd done for them, applied pressure through your patron, mobilized your clients to create the appearance of popular support. You wanted to block a law? Same process, different direction. The Senate wasn't a deliberative body. It was a theatre where pre-negotiated deals got performed for public consumption. The real decisions happened in private conversations, in hallways, at dinner parties, in whispered exchanges where favors were traded and threats were implied. You couldn't survive without your network, couldn't advance without your patron's support, couldn't maintain your position without your client's loyalty. And the anxiety was constant, because loyalty was conditional. Your patron could drop you if you became inconvenient. Your clients could drift to someone more generous. Your rivals could poach your supporters by offering better favors. You had to constantly maintain these relationships, constantly perform generosity, constantly demonstrate your value. One misstep, one perceived slight, one failure to deliver, and the network could collapse. This is why you're exhausted, why you can't sleep, why every social interaction is a calculation. Because power in Rome wasn't about holding office. It was about maintaining your position in an endless web of obligation, about making sure you owed the right people, and were owed by enough people to matter. You weren't governing. You were managing relationships, constantly, endlessly, with no breaks and no security. The patron-client system was brilliant, efficient. It made Roman society function without needing a massive bureaucracy or a police state. It also made everyone paranoid. Because your power wasn't institutional, it was personal. And personal power is fragile, conditional, dependent on the mood and interests of people who might decide tomorrow that you're not worth the effort. You're sitting in the dark, thinking about your clients, your patron, your rivals, the younger senator who's building his own network, the alliances that might be shifting while you sleep. This is how power worked. This is what you're managing. This is why you're tired. Not because the work is hard, because the work never ends. Let's talk about where you fit in the Roman social hierarchy. Actually, let's talk about where everyone fits. Because Rome had a structure, a rigid, inflexible, birth-determined structure that decided your entire life before you were old enough to have opinions about it. At the top, senators. You. The maybe 600 families who controlled everything that mattered. Wealth, land, political power, social prestige. You were born into this. Your father was a senator, or your grandfather, or your family had enough money and connections to buy their way in generations ago. You didn't earn this position. You inherited it. And that inheritance came with expectations. You were supposed to serve in the military, hold office, maintain your family's reputation, marry appropriately, produce legitimate heirs, die with your dignity intact. Below you, the equestrians, the wealthy business class, rich, but not senatorial. They made their money through trade, tax collection, military contracts, provincial exploitation. Some of them were richer than you. Didn't matter. They weren't senators. They couldn't hold the highest offices. They couldn't wear the broad purple stripe on their toga. They were second tier, and everyone knew it. Some of them resented this. Some of them spent fortunes trying to marry into senatorial families, trying to buy their way up. Sometimes it worked. Usually it didn't. The Senate protected its exclusivity. Below them, the plebs, the common citizens, the vast majority of Rome, shopkeepers, artisans, small farmers, labourers, soldiers, free men with voting rights and legal protections, but no real power. They could vote, sure, but you controlled how they voted through your patron-client networks. They could speak in public forums, but you controlled which voices got heard. They weren't starving, most of them. Rome kept them fed with grain subsidies and entertained with games, bread and circuses. Keep them fed and distracted, and they won't revolt. But they also weren't climbing anywhere. A pleb stayed a pleb. His son stayed a pleb. Maybe, if he got very lucky and very rich and very connected, his grandson might become an equestrian. Maybe. Probably not. Below them, freedmen. Former slaves who'd been manumitted. Legally free, but socially tainted. They could own property, conduct business, even become wealthy. But they couldn't hold office, couldn't serve in the legions, couldn't marry into respectable families. Their children were born free and had more options, but the stain of slavery lingered. And at the bottom, slaves. Property, not people. No rights, no protections, no future except what their owner decided to give them. Some were treated well. Some were worked to death in mines or on farms. Some were educated and managed their owner's business affairs. Some were raped and discarded. All of them were property. Rome ran on slave labour. The farms, the mines, the workshops, the households. Slaves did the work that made everything else possible. And everyone just accepted this. It wasn't a moral question. It was economic reality. Here's the thing. This hierarchy was permanent. You were born into your class, and you died in your class. There was no social mobility, no meritocracy, no work hard and succeed. Mythology. If you were born a pleb, you stayed a pleb. Didn't matter how smart you were, how ambitious, how talented. You weren't climbing into the Senate. The doors were closed. If you were born a slave, you stayed a slave unless your owner decided otherwise. And even if you were freed, you were still marked. Still lesser. Still outside the respectable classes. The only people with options were the ones born with options. The senatorial and equestrian families. and even they were constrained by expectations and social rules that determined everything from who they could marry to what jobs were acceptable. You're sitting in the dark, thinking about the younger senator, the one who reminds you of yourself. He was born into this, just like you. He didn't earn his position any more than you earned yours. The difference between you and a pleb isn't merit, it's birth, luck, the accident of which family you were born into. And you know this. You've always known this. But you don't talk about it, because the system works better when everyone pretends it's natural, when everyone accepts that some people are just better, more deserving, more qualified to rule. The hierarchy isn't fair. It isn't just. It isn't based on merit or talent or effort. It's based on birth. And it's permanent. That's Rome. That's the social structure. That's the reality you were born into and will die in. You're at the top. You're powerful. You're privileged. And you're trapped just like everyone else, just in a more comfortable cage. Now let's talk about the jobs nobody wanted, but everyone needed. The professions that kept Rome functioning, but also kept the people who did them at arm's length. The work that was essential and disgusting and socially toxic. Rome was a city of 1 million people, maybe more. That many humans crammed together produce a lot of problems. Waste, disease, death, filth. Someone had to deal with it. Someone had to do the work that respectable people pretended didn't exist. Fullers, for example. The people who cleaned cloth. Sounds innocent, right? Except the process involved stomping on fabric in vats of human urine. Yes, urine. It was collected from public urinals, aged until it was sufficiently ammonia-rich, then used to clean and whiten cloth. Fullers spent their days standing in piss. Their workshops smelled like piss. They went home smelling like piss, and everyone knew it. You needed clean togas. You needed white cloth. But you didn't want to associate with the people who made that possible. Tanners. The people who turned animal hides into leather. The process involved soaking skins in animal brains, feces, and urine, then scraping off the hair and flesh, then treating the leather with more disgusting substances. The smell was overwhelming. Tanneries were pushed to the edges of the city because nobody could stand to be near them. But you needed leather for shoes, belts, armor, saddles, bags. Leather was everywhere, essential, and the people who made it were treated like they carried a contagion. Executioners. Someone had to kill the people Rome condemned to death, crucify the rebels, strangle the criminals, throw the condemned to the beasts in the arena. This was necessary work. The state required it. But the people who did it were polluted by it, tainted. You didn't invite an executioner to dinner. You didn't marry your daughter to one. And undertakers. Your profession. The people who handled the dead, who washed corpses and prepared them for burial, who managed cremations and funerals, who touched the bodies that everyone else was afraid to touch. Death was everywhere in Rome. People died constantly. Disease, accidents, violence, old age. Every death required someone to handle the body, to perform the rites, to make sure the dead were properly disposed of. That someone was you, and everyone needed you. But nobody wanted to be near you. The stigma was real. You handled corpses. You were polluted by death. Contaminated. There were religious concerns. Touching the dead made you ritually impure. There were practical concerns. disease, smell, the visceral horror of decay. But mostly, it was psychological. People didn't want to think about death, didn't want to acknowledge the messy, physical reality of what happened to bodies. So they pushed that reality onto people like you, made you do the work, then treated you like you were lesser for doing it. You couldn't hold office, couldn't serve in the legions, couldn't marry into respectable families. Your children inherited the stigma. Your profession marked you. And yet you made money. Sometimes good money. Wealthy families paid well for elaborate funerals. The funeral trade was lucrative. You could own property, live comfortably, even become wealthy. But you'd never be respectable, never be accepted, never be invited to the dinner parties where power was traded and alliances were formed. This was the contradiction. Rome needed these professions. Desperately. The city couldn't function without fullers and tanners and executioners and undertakers. But it also needed to keep these people at a distance, to mark them as other, to make sure everyone knew they were doing work that respectable people would never touch. The hierarchy wasn't just about wealth or birth. It was about pollution, contamination, the belief that certain kinds of work degraded the people who did them. You're lying in the dark, thinking about the funeral you managed today, the wealthy family, the elaborate procession, the professional mourners performing their grief. They needed you, paid you, then forgot about you as quickly as possible. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. You do the work nobody else will do. You make good money. You live comfortably. And you're never quite clean, never quite acceptable, never quite human in the eyes of the people who need you most. Rome ran on invisible labor, on the work that happened in the margins, on the people who kept the city functioning while being treated like they didn't quite exist. You're one of them. Essential and expendable. Necessary and disgusting. That's the job. That's the life. That's the contradiction you live with every single day. Let's talk about the military. Because if you're a senator, you started there. Everyone did. It wasn't optional. You couldn't hold political office without proving you'd served Rome in the field. So you went. Late teens, early 20s. You put on armor and marched off to some province that didn't want you there. And you learned things. Things you didn't want to learn. Things you can't unlearn. You learned how to kill. Not in some abstract, honorable way. In a very specific, visceral way. You learned what it sounds like when a sword goes into a human body. What it smells like when a man's intestines are exposed to air. What it looks like when someone dies slowly, screaming, begging. You learned how to follow orders. Even when the orders were horrifying. Even when the orders meant burning villages and killing civilians and doing things that would haunt you for the rest of your life. You learned that war isn't glorious. It's boring and terrifying in alternating waves. Mostly boring. Long marches, camp construction, ditch digging, standing guard, waiting. Then suddenly, terrifyingly, violently, not boring. Then boring again. You learned that your life was cheap, that the generals didn't care about you personally, that you were a resource to be expended in pursuit of objectives that had nothing to do with your survival. You learned that some men break, just stop functioning, sit down and refuse to move. Cry. Desert. Get executed for cowardice. You learned that you're not one of those men. You keep functioning, keep following orders, keep killing when you're told to kill. And you learned that this doesn't make you strong. It makes you something else. Something harder. something that can't quite connect to normal human emotions anymore. You came back. You were 23, 24. You'd survived. You had scars. You had stories you'd never tell. You had nightmares that would follow you for decades. And you had the qualification you needed: military service. Proof that you'd bled for Rome. Proof that you were serious. Proof that you could be trusted with power. So you entered politics, started climbing the cursus honorum, started performing the role of the respectable senator. But you never quite left the military behind. It shaped you, changed you, made you into someone who could make hard decisions without flinching, someone who could watch suffering without being paralyzed by it, someone who understood that violence was a tool, not a moral failing. Your colleagues in the Senate, they all had the same experience. They all served. They all killed. They all came back changed. Nobody talked about it. You didn't discuss the things you'd done in Germania, or Gaul, or Britannia, or wherever you'd been sent. You didn't compare nightmares. You didn't acknowledge that you were all carrying the same weight. You just performed normalcy. Performed civilization. Pretended that the years you spent killing people were a distant, irrelevant phase of your youth. But they weren't irrelevant. They were foundational. They taught you that power comes from violence. That Rome's glory was built on conquest and subjugation, and the systematic destruction of anyone who resisted. You learned that the marble buildings and the elaborate togas and the philosophical debates were all built on a foundation of blood. That civilization was just organized violence with better aesthetics. And you learned that you were capable of participating in that violence. That you could do terrible things and then come home and eat dinner and sleep and wake up and do it again. This is what military service did. It took young men from wealthy families and turned them into killers, then sent them back to Rome to govern, to make laws, to administer justice. The system required it. You couldn't be trusted with power unless you'd proven you could wield violence, unless you demonstrated that you could follow orders even when the orders were horrifying. So you served. You killed. You came back. You entered politics. And you never quite stopped being the young officer who learned that human life was cheap and violence was normal. And the screaming eventually stops. You're sitting in the dark, thinking about Germania, about the village you burned, about the faces you can't forget, about the things you did that you've never told anyone. That's still in you. That's always been in you. That's part of what made you successful. Because power in Rome required a certain kind of hardness, a certain willingness to do what needed to be done without being paralyzed by conscience. Military service taught you that, trained you for it, made you into the kind of man who could sit in the Senate and make decisions that would ruin lives without losing sleep. Well, without losing much sleep. The nightmares still come. Sometimes. Less often now. But they come. That's the cost. That's what military service took from you. That's what it gave you in return. The qualification to pursue power. And the knowledge that power is just violence in a toga. Now let's talk about the emperor. Because he's the reason you can't sleep. The reason every political calculation includes an element of terror. The reason success feels like walking a tightrope over a pit of knives. Here's the problem. You're ambitious. You're successful. You're climbing toward the consulship. You're building power and influence, and a network of clients and allies. And that makes you dangerous. Not to Rome, not to the people, to the emperor. Because every ambitious senator is a potential threat. Every powerful man is someone who might decide he'd make a better emperor. Every successful politician is someone who could gather support and launch a coup. The emperor knows this. Every emperor knows this. Because that's how most of them got the job. They were ambitious senators or generals who decided the current emperor needed to be replaced. They gathered support. They made their move. They won. And now they're sitting on the throne, looking at men like you, and thinking, that could be me. That could be my assassin. That could be the man who ends my reign. So the emperor watches, constantly. He has spies, informants, people who report on what you say at dinner parties, who you meet with, who your allies are, what your clients are saying in the streets. He's looking for signs, evidence of disloyalty, proof that you're plotting, anything that could justify removing you before you become a real threat. And you know this. You've always known this. So you're careful. You never criticize the emperor publicly. You praise him. You support his policies. You make sure your loyalty is visible and unquestionable. But you also know that visible loyalty isn't enough. Because the emperor isn't just worried about actual plots. He's worried about potential plots. About men who could become threats, even if they're not threats yet. So you have to be careful about being too successful, too visible, too powerful. Because if you rise too high, too fast, you become a target. The emperor starts wondering if you're getting ideas, if you're building a base of support that could challenge him. This is the trap. You need to be successful to matter. But if you're too successful, you become dangerous. And dangerous men don't last long. Some emperors were paranoid, constantly seeing threats, executing senators on flimsy evidence, creating an atmosphere of terror where nobody felt safe. Some emperors were more relaxed, more confident, more willing to tolerate ambitious men, as long as they stayed loyal. But even the relaxed emperors were still watching, still calculating, still aware that their power depended on making sure nobody else accumulated enough power to challenge them. And you never knew which kind of emperor you were dealing with. The mood could shift. A secure emperor could become paranoid. A tolerant emperor could decide he needed to make an example of someone. So you lived with constant uncertainty, constant anxiety, the knowledge that one wrong word, one perceived slight, one moment of being too successful could end everything. This is why you're exhausted, why you can't sleep, why every social interaction is a calculation. Because you're not just managing your relationships with other senators, you're managing your relationship with the emperor, making sure you're valuable enough to matter, but not threatening enough to eliminate. It's an impossible balance, and you know it. Everyone knows it. Some men gave up, retired from politics, moved to their country estates and spent their remaining years in comfortable obscurity, decided that survival was more important than ambition. You didn't do that. You kept climbing, kept building power, kept taking the risk. And now you're sitting in the dark, wondering if you've gone too far. If the younger senator who's rising behind you is going to be the excuse the emperor needs to remove you, if your success has made you expendable. The emperor problem isn't that emperors are evil. Some were. Some weren't. The problem is structural. The system creates mutual paranoia. The emperor has to worry about ambitious senators. Ambitious senators have to worry about the emperor's suspicion. Everyone's trapped. Everyone's afraid. Everyone's performing loyalty while calculating their next move. This is what Imperial Rome created. A political system where success was dangerous, where ambition was suspect, where power was always conditional and always fragile. You wanted to climb to the top. You're almost there. And you're realizing that the top is the most dangerous place to be. Because the emperor is watching. Always watching. And you never know when he'll decide you've become a problem. Let's talk about the games. The spectacles. The gladiatorial contests and chariot races and theatrical performances that Rome was famous for. Because if you think they were just entertainment, you're missing the point entirely. The games were politics. They were control. They were how you managed a city of 1 million people who had legitimate grievances and no real power to address them. Here's the situation. Rome was full of poor people, unemployed people, people who'd been pushed off their land by wealthy senators buying up farms, people who lived in crowded tenements and worked irregular jobs and had every reason to be angry about their situation. In a normal society, these people would revolt, would demand change, would organize and threaten the power structure. Rome solved this problem with bread and circuses, free grain distributions and free entertainment. Keep them fed, keep them distracted, keep them too entertained to organize. The games were the circus's part, and they were expensive, massively expensive. Someone had to pay for the gladiators, the animals, the elaborate sets, the prizes, the whole production. That someone was you, or men like you. Ambitious politicians who wanted to build popularity, who needed the common people to remember their names, who understood that funding spectacular games was an investment in political capital. You'd spend a fortune, sometimes your entire fortune, sometimes you'd go into debt, all to put on games that would make the people cheer your name, that would make them associate you with generosity and entertainment and good times. And it worked. The people loved the games, loved the spectacle, loved the violence and the drama and the excitement. They'd pack the amphitheatre, cheer for their favourite gladiators, bet on the outcomes, spend the whole day watching men and animals kill each other. And they'd remember who paid for it. They'd remember your name. They'd vote for you when you ran for office. They'd support you in the forum. They'd be your base of popular support. This wasn't charity. This wasn't generosity. This was political calculation. You were buying loyalty with blood and spectacle. The emperors understood this too. They put on the biggest games, the most elaborate spectacles, hundreds of gladiators, exotic animals from across the empire, naval battles in flooded arenas, executions staged as mythological reenactments. The message was clear. The emperor provides. The emperor is generous. The emperor gives you entertainment and excitement and a break from your miserable lives. Don't think about your poverty. Don't think about your lack of power. Don't think about the fact that the system is rigged against you. Just watch the games. Cheer. Enjoy yourselves. And it worked. Brilliantly. The games kept the population pacified, kept them from organizing, kept them focused on spectacle instead of politics. You're sitting in the dark, thinking about the games you funded when you were an aedile, the gladiatorial contest that nearly bankrupted you, the way the crowd cheered your name, the way it felt to have that kind of popularity. You also remember the cost, not just the money, the lives. The men who died in the arena so you could build political capital, the animals slaughtered for entertainment, the whole grotesque machinery of violence that you participated in and benefited from. But you don't feel guilty, not really, because this is how the system works. This is how you build power in Rome. You give the people what they want. You put on a show. You make them love you. And what they want is blood, violence, spectacle. The thrill of watching someone else suffer and die while they sit safely in the stands. The games weren't a distraction from Roman politics. They were Roman politics. They were how power was built and maintained, how the masses were controlled, how ambitious men bought their way into office. You funded games. You'll fund more games. Because that's what success requires. That's how you stay relevant. That's how you maintain your position. The people need bread and circuses. You provide the circuses. The emperor provides the biggest circuses. Everyone stays in their place. And the whole system continues, built on spectacle and violence and the calculated manipulation of a population that's too entertained to revolt. That's Rome. That's the games. That's what you participated in and benefited from. The comfortable lie is that it was just entertainment. The uncomfortable truth is that it was social control. And you were part of it. Now let's talk about the women. Because if you think Roman politics was just men in togas making speeches, you're missing half the story. The more important half. Women couldn't hold office, couldn't vote, couldn't serve in the military, couldn't represent themselves in court. Legally, they were perpetual minors. Under the authority of their fathers, then their husbands, then their sons. That was the official story. The legal reality. The actual reality was completely different. Women ran Roman politics, not openly, not officially, but effectively. Through their husbands, through their sons, through their networks of relationships, and their careful manipulation of the men who had official power. Your wife, for example. She can't hold office, but she manages your household, controls your social calendar, decides which dinner invitations you accept, maintains relationships with the wives of other senators, gathers information, spreads rumors, builds alliances. She knows things you don't know, hears things you don't hear, has access to conversations that happen in spaces you're not invited to. The women's quarters, the private gatherings, the informal networks where information flows freely. And she uses that information, tells you which senators are having financial problems, which marriages are failing, which families are rising or falling, which alliances are shifting. You make decisions based on her information. You think you're making independent political calculations. But half of what you know came from her network, from the invisible web of women who are watching and listening and sharing information. Some women were more direct. Livia, Augustus's wife. She was arguably the most powerful person in Rome for decades, couldn't hold office, couldn't command armies. But she controlled access to the emperor, influenced his decisions, arranged marriages, built alliances, eliminated threats. People knew this. Everyone knew that if you wanted something from Augustus, you went through Livia, that her favor was as important as his, that crossing her was dangerous. Or Agrippina, mother of Nero. She maneuvered her son onto the throne, controlled him for years, made policy decisions, eliminated rivals, ran the empire from behind the scenes until Nero finally had her killed because he couldn't stand being controlled anymore. These weren't exceptions. These were just the most visible examples of something that happened constantly. Women exercising power through the men in their lives, through their sons and husbands and brothers. They couldn't do it openly, couldn't claim credit, couldn't build official careers. But they could influence, manipulate, guide, control. And they did, constantly, because they had to, because the system gave them no official power, so they built unofficial power. They created networks, gathered information, made themselves indispensable. Your wife is doing this right now. While you're sitting in the dark, exhausted from your day of political performance, she's already thinking about tomorrow, about which relationships need maintenance, about which information needs to be shared or concealed, about how to position your family for the next opportunity. She's better at this than you are, more patient, more subtle, more willing to play the long game. You have the official power, the title, the toga, the seat in the Senate. She has the actual power, the information, the relationships, the ability to make things happen without anyone noticing her hand in it. This is how Rome actually worked. Men performed power in public. Women exercised power in private. Men made speeches. Women made decisions. Men thought they were in control. Women knew better. The system was designed to exclude women from power, and women responded by building a parallel system, an invisible system, a network of relationships and information and influence that was just as powerful as the official structures, maybe more powerful, because official power was visible, accountable, constrained by law and custom and public opinion. Unofficial power was invisible, unaccountable, free to operate in the shadows where nobody was watching. You're sitting in the dark, thinking about your wife, about the conversation you had earlier, about the information she gave you, about the alliance she suggested. You'll probably follow her advice. You usually do, because she's usually right, not because she's smarter than you, because she has better information, better relationships, better understanding of how things actually work. The comfortable lie is that men ran Rome. The uncomfortable truth is that women ran the men who ran Rome, and everyone knew it. They just didn't talk about it, because talking about it would undermine the official story. The legal fiction. The performance of male authority. So everyone pretended. Men pretended they were in control. Women pretended they were powerless. And the whole system functioned on this mutual pretense. That's Rome. That's power. That's the reality behind the performance. The women couldn't hold office. But they didn't need to. They had something better. They had influence. And influence, it turns out, is more useful than authority. Let's talk about money. Because if you think being a wealthy Roman senator meant you were financially secure, you're adorable. Wealth in Rome was complicated, precarious, often fictional. Here's what wealth meant. Land. That was the foundation. Agricultural land. Estates. Farms worked by slaves or tenant farmers. The produce from that land, grain, wine, olive oil, that was your real income. But land was expensive, and you needed a lot of it to maintain senatorial status. The Senate had minimum wealth requirements. If you fell below that threshold, you were out, no longer qualified to serve. So you had to maintain your land holdings, had to keep buying more land, had to keep expanding. Because land was how you proved you were wealthy enough to matter. The problem, land doesn't generate cash quickly. Your income comes in once or twice a year when the harvest is sold. The rest of the time, you're living on credit. on loans, on the expectation of future income, and you have expenses, constant expenses, your household, your slaves, your clients who expect regular gifts, your political career which requires funding games and public works, your social obligations which require hosting dinners and maintaining appearances, your spending constantly, earning periodically. The gap is filled with debt. Everyone was in debt. Seriously. Even the wealthiest senators were carrying massive loans, borrowing from each other, from wealthy freedmen, from anyone who had liquid capital. This wasn't considered shameful. It was normal. Expected. Part of how the system worked. You borrowed to fund your political career. You paid back the loans when your investments paid off. When you won office and could extract wealth from a province. When your land produced a good harvest. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes you climbed high enough to make your debts irrelevant, to extract enough wealth from provincial governorships or military commands to pay everything back and still come out ahead. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes you went bankrupt, lost your land, lost your senatorial status, became a cautionary tale about ambition exceeding resources. The really wealthy, the ones who'd been wealthy for generations, they had enough land that the income covered their expenses. They didn't need to borrow. They could lend to others. They were the stable foundation of the system. But most senators weren't that wealthy. Most were constantly juggling debt and income and expenses, constantly calculating whether they could afford the next political move, whether funding games would pay off in electoral success, whether the risk was worth it. You're sitting in the dark thinking about your finances, about the loans you're carrying, about the land you need to buy, about the games you'll need to fund when you run for consul. You're wealthy. On paper, you own land, you have income, you have slaves and property and all the markers of success. You're also in debt, significant debt, debt that requires careful management and constant attention, and the hope that your political career continues to advance so you can eventually pay it all back. This is normal. This is how it works. Wealth in Rome isn't about having money. It's about having land and credit and the expectation of future income. It's about maintaining the appearance of wealth while constantly scrambling to make the numbers work. About performing prosperity while privately calculating how long you can sustain the performance. Some men couldn't sustain it, went bankrupt, lost everything, became examples of what happens when ambition exceeds resources. You're determined not to be one of them. You're careful. You calculate. You make sure your debts are manageable, that your income will eventually cover your expenses. But you also know it's precarious. One bad harvest, one political setback, one failed investment, and the whole structure could collapse. Wealth in Rome was power, but it was also anxiety. The constant awareness that your position depended on maintaining a financial balancing act that could fail at any moment. You're wealthy, you're powerful, you're successful. You're also one bad year away from losing everything. That's the economic reality. That's what wealth actually meant. That's what you're managing, while also managing your political career and your social obligations and your constant performance of success. Money wasn't security. It was another source of anxiety. Another thing to calculate and manage and worry about. Welcome to Roman wealth. It's not as comfortable as it looks. Finally, let's talk about the Senate itself, about what it actually was, versus what everyone pretended it was. The official story, the Senate was the heart of Roman government. The deliberative body where the wisest men debated policy and made decisions for the good of Rome. The continuation of the Roman Republic. The voice of the people through their elected representatives. That was the story. The performance. The comfortable fiction everyone maintained. The reality. The Senate was a rubber stamp. A theatre where pre-decided policies were performed for public consumption. A collection of men who served at the pleasure of the emperor and knew it. The Republic was dead. Had been dead for over a century. Augustus killed it. Turned Rome into an empire while carefully maintaining all the republican institutions. The Senate still met, still debated, still voted. But everyone knew the votes didn't matter. The emperor decided policy. The Senate approved it. That was the arrangement. You couldn't say this out loud, couldn't acknowledge it publicly, because the fiction was important. Rome was still a republic. The Senate still had power. The emperor was just the first citizen, first among equals. Nobody believed this. But everyone performed it. Because the alternative was admitting that Rome was a dictatorship, that the emperor was a monarch, that all the republican institutions were just costumes. So you went to the Senate. You sat through debates. You listened to speeches about grain distributions and aqueduct repairs and provincial administration. You voted. You performed the role of senator. And you knew it was theatre. Knew that the real decisions were made in the emperor's palace, in private conversations, in whispered exchanges that never made it into the official record. The Senate's real function wasn't legislation. It was legitimation. The emperor needed the Senate to approve his policies so he could claim he was governing with the consent of Rome's traditional institutions, so he could maintain the fiction of republican government. And the Senate needed the emperor to maintain the fiction that they mattered, that their debates and votes and speeches had meaning, that they were still the heart of Roman government. It was mutual pretense, mutually beneficial pretense. The emperor got legitimacy. The Senate got the illusion of power. Everyone performed their roles. Everyone pretended it was real. You're sitting in the dark, thinking about today's Senate session, about the hours of debate over grain policy, about the speeches and the procedural arguments and the final vote that everyone knew was predetermined. You participated. You spoke. You voted. You performed your role as senator. And you knew it was meaningless. Knew that the policy had been decided before the session started. Knew that your vote was just part of the performance. But you couldn't say that. Couldn't acknowledge it. Because acknowledging it would break the fiction, would force everyone to confront the reality that the Republic was dead, and you were all just actors in an elaborate play. So you kept performing, kept pretending, kept maintaining the comfortable lie that the Senate mattered, that your debates had meaning, that Rome was still a republic. This is what the cursus honorum led to. This is what you climbed toward. A seat in a deliberative body that didn't actually deliberate. A position of power that didn't actually have power. A role in government that was mostly performance. You wanted to matter, wanted to have influence, wanted to shape Rome's future. And you got a costume, and a script, and a stage where you performed democracy for an audience that knew it was fake, but appreciated the effort anyway. The Senate wasn't government. It was theatre. Elaborate, expensive, carefully choreographed theatre, designed to maintain the fiction that Rome was still the republic it had been centuries ago. And you were an actor. A good actor. A convincing actor. Playing the role of senator in a play called the Roman Republic that everyone knew was fiction, but nobody wanted to end. That's what you achieved. That's what success looks like. That's what you're sitting in the dark thinking about. You climbed to the top of a system that was designed to exhaust you while giving you nothing real. You achieved power that was mostly performance. You became important in a government that was mostly theatre. Congratulations. You won. You made it. You're a Roman senator. And it means almost nothing at all.